Okay, so we're going to be replacing the battery in this Garmin Fenix 5X watch. So what I'm doing here is I'm just taking a mobile phone spudger tool and I'm just going in, and you can see, look on the edge here, tiny little gap just there, and that's where the screws are actually located, and that's where we want to get the spudger in order to remove the front bezel. Okay, so it literally just comes off like so. It's just a bit of adhesive essentially holding that on. We can now get these Torx screws off of here. Okay, so the first thing you've got to do to get into this Garmin Fenix 5X to replace the battery is to actually remove the front of the case rather than the rear. It's different on the 5, but on the 5X you need to remove the front. On the 5, I believe you're going from the rear. Now to do that, you are going to need a tool set such as this, which has the kind of the very small kind of star Torx bits and various other pentalobe, etc. that you use on mobile phones. It's a brilliant kit. It's quite cheap on Amazon. Now, the particular size you're going to need for the face here is known as, it's labelled as a 6H in the set. So you're going to want a 6H to get this front face off. Okay, there we go, all those screws are out now. The next thing I will say is before I take the face off, you can see I've got it on a blue anti-static mat. That's dissipating any static, so if you walk around on carpet or you run up and down the stairs, you're going to build up static. An anti-static mat is a great idea. I've also got a wrist strap on, meaning that I'm grounded, so there's no way that I'm going to dissipate any static to the devices inside the watch. Now, once you've taken those screws off, next thing to do is then we're just going to use our fingernails to just prise that face off. And you can see the Garmin logos at the bottom there. We're going to flip this over on its right hand side, and then we're going to disconnect the LCD connector behind. Now that did come off very easily, and normally you get a bit more resistance than that, but nonetheless I think that this might be the first time this has had a replacement battery. You can see that there's this kind of tape here holding down the connector for the LCD, so we're just going to pry that tape up, and that will allow us to get to the connector and then pry that connector off. There we go, and then that's off. You're going to want to keep hold of that. That's probably okay to reuse. There you go, just lift it up. So you can see the connector there, it literally is just a push fit into there. So it's not too delicate, that connector, it's actually not too bad. Okay, so next we're going to disconnect the battery, which is just located just here under this kind of orange sort of tape there. So literally again, it's just the tweezers, and just give it a little bit of pressure underneath at the side, and it just pops up. It's a very similar connector to the LCD connector over here. Once that's off, you can then remove this section here. It just completely pulls out, like so. Okay, so the next step is to remove these two screws which are holding the main circuit board into the rear of the case. These are one size smaller, so these are going to be labelled in your kit, if using the same as me, as number 5 star bits. So number 5, they are identical, so you don't need to keep them in any particular order, but they are obviously different to the screws that came out the front of the case. Okay, with those two screws removed, there's nothing actually holding the circuit board into the rear of the watch. What you're going to need to do is lift the circuit board up. Now you can use a pair of tweezers to do that, but tweezers can be quite destructive. They can scratch the board, so I personally prefer to try a plastic spudger instead. There we go. Okay, there we go. So just a little bit of pressure underneath, just pulled it out. So you can now see the old battery on the reverse of the main circuit board there. Now the first thing I would note is that the replacement battery is quite a different shape to that old battery, but it will still fit, it's fine, but it's a different shape. So just be aware of that. Now that we've got the actual watch module out of the watch, here comes the hardest part of the whole repair, okay, which is going to be separating the old battery from the PCB. Now in my case, this is the original battery that came with the watch, and that will mean that the adhesive that the Garmin have used to hold this battery to the PCB is extremely tough to remove. So you want to make life as easy for yourself as possible, and while you're doing it, you also want to bear in mind that this is a lithium-ion polymer battery. So this is very dangerous. If you bend this significantly, or if you heat it up too much, you could get an arc flash explosion or a chemical explosion. And even with a battery this size, could be really dangerous. So do be super careful with this point. So I am actually going to go ahead and have a go without warming it up. So if you look in this gap right here, you can just see the adhesive pad that Garmin have used to hold this on. That's what we need to soften up and get underneath, but essentially. Okay, so that wasn't too bad actually. Let's come off with just a little bit of force, didn't need to heat it up. It's all good. Possibly that has been replaced in the past, and maybe that's not the first time. Okay, so now that the battery's off, it's actually easier to remove this connector after the battery is displaced from the rear. Okay, and the way to remove this connector is actually not how you might expect. It doesn't pull out in this direction, it pulls up in this direction. Okay, so we just want to get underneath it and put it directly up, like so. Okay, so to put the new one on, I've got to bear in mind that the tail here on the battery on the new one is a lot longer than the old one. So the way I'm going to get around that is I'm going to put the connector on first. It'll just push straight down like that, and then I'm actually going to mount the battery around about there, and I'm going to fold the tail back on itself. So I'll show you what I mean. Now obviously you've got to bear in mind there's two contacts here, positive and negative. There will be some charge in this battery. If I contact between positive and negative, that's not going to be good. So I'm going to be careful and make sure that as I push it down, I'm not shorting those two out. There you go, do it with your finger, that's non-conductive, it's better than using your tweezers. And I'm now going to lay it down like that, so in reverse if you like. Now, you've got to be really careful with the placement of the new battery. And I'm hoping that's going to be about right, and I'm just going to route the cable just down the side there. And once I'm fairly happy with it, I'm going to then offer it up to the case and see if we can get it in the case. Hey, I really hope this video was helpful. If it is, do please consider hitting the like and subscribe button. Back to the video. Now I'm going to offer the PCB up to the watch and check for fitment. Now it's important to note that there's 4 little copper conductors here, and they're finger conductors, and they want to line up with these 4 little point conductors just here inside the case. And equally, there's these 4 little conductors here on this side, and they want to line up with the 4 on the edge of the PCB just there. So we'll now put it back in that direction, and as you put it back in, just be mindful of this ribbon connector here. Just try and keep that out of the way if you can. You can always rescue it later if not. Now I'm just seeing as I'm putting it down that in fact my battery cables are fouling on this section here, so you've got to be super careful with that. Okay, the other thing to bear in mind is there's these 3 little spigots just here, and they need to line up with the 3 sort of cutouts on the PCB. This one here, and this little hole just here. So that one there will go in the little hole just there. These 2 holes obviously are the screw holes, so they will be for those 2 there. Now this will take a few goes. You have got to have a bit of patience with this. Okay, but you will get there. There we go. So it seemed that tipping it down at an angle on this side first and then tipping it onto this side seemed to be the way to get it in effectively. So that has now gone in, and we can now go ahead and get those screws in once the PCB is seated fully, and then get the vibrator connector connected back up as well. Okay, so now we can get the vibrator ribbon cable connector just back on just there, and you can either do it with your fingers or plastic spudger. There it goes. Nice and secure. Okay, so the next step is to get this little plastic spacer in place. Now it is conductive and it does perform an electronic function. You can see on the rear of it those 3 contacts. So they need to contact with these 3 little contacts here, despite the alignment and the shape not being quite the same. There's these 3 contacts there, they contact with those 3 there. Now you'll note that it's located correctly because these 2 holes here, they engage with these 2 little spigots just here. So that's what they are for, as well as aligning the PCB. So just line it up roughly. That's it. So there you go, simple as that, just drops straight on. Okay, so the next step before we put the screen back on is to get the rubber gasket into the groove around the face here. Now mine could do a little clean, so I'm going to get some little cotton swabs and some isopropyl alcohol and give that a good clean out. There we go, it's looking a bit better. So now we can go ahead and get the gasket straight back in there. Good way to locate it is it's got these 2 little kind of semicircles here, and they will obviously correspond with these 2 here. Okay, I can see just a tiny bit of debris on the back of that gasket, so I'm just going to run a bit more IPA just around the edge, just to make sure that it's totally clean. That way it will maintain its waterproofness once we use it again. There we go. So now we can get the screen back on. Where the screen will replace is simply as we took it off, so it opened up like a book. So we'll just put it on in the same fashion, and we'll just get this connector. It's just a press down connector. You just need to line it up. You might need reading glasses if you're anything like me. just push it in, simple as that. Now if you want, you can reuse the green tape that was used there before, so hold that down. I'm going to go ahead and reuse that actually. There we go, that's taped back on now, and now we can put the face back on. And again, obviously you need to use the larger, so the number 6H bit in order to get the front face screws back on. So you want to do them progressively, so do them all up loose and then do opposite ones as much as you can, a bit like if you've ever done a head gasket on a car, because that will mean that the pressure is maintained evenly all the way around as you tighten them up. As you tighten them up, when you feel a bit of resistance, don't over tighten them. They don't need to be super tight. You just want to feel that resistance and then just tiny bit more, but not too much. It's very easy to strip the threads on these, so just wait till you feel the resistance, see the resistance there, and I'm just going to give it a smidge more, hardly anything. Then just double check them all and you're good to go. Now let's plug it in and see if it charges. And there you go, you can see on the screen it is successfully charging. Success! There it is.